Joining us now is Todd Yeary. He's a former air traffic controller and is now a pastor at Douglas Memorial Community Church. I want to ask you, we've got these two really terrible tragedies just days apart, but the situations are very different. And I want to start with the crash last night in Philly. According to audio transmissions, the air traffic controller, it sounds like they tried to get in touch with the pilot of this medevac flight, but apparently there was no response, and the Learjet crashed within minutes of taking off. How unusual is it as a controller not to hear anything at all back from the pilots, and does that indicate anything to you?
Thanks for having me. It is extremely unusual, and what it says, particularly in the incident that occurred last evening, is that whatever contributed to the loss of control and the devastating crash that took place in Philadelphia happened pretty quickly. From what I've been able to hear, I do know that there was a takeoff clearance issued. It was accepted. The flight did indeed take off. And then after reaching an altitude of, I believe, about 1,600 feet, something occurred. We don't know whether that occurrence was mechanical in terms of flight controls. It may have been the power plant. It could have been something on the flight deck. But whatever it was, it happened with very little response time available to the crew to be able to correct whatever anomaly may have been taking place. And so what it says to me as a former controller is that air traffic control is a dynamic reality. Things can change suddenly without any warning. And in a matter of just mere seconds, you could go from what is otherwise a routine shift or a routine day to a catastrophic incident, as we saw last night and earlier this week.
And a catastrophic night in D.C. I want to ask you now about that plane crash. We're still waiting for the NTSB's investigation and the data from those black boxes. But according to publicly available data reviewed by NBC News, it suggests the helicopter may have been flying too high at the time of the crash. In D.C., you see these helicopters kind of in the flight path all the time, but they're supposed to stay around 200 feet. In that case, if that was the case, what should the air traffic controller do in that situation? Can you take us through what you perceive could have happened above the Potomac on Wednesday night?
Well, let me not so much deal with perception. Let me deal with the information that I have heard. When we first heard the clip of the controller asking the crew of the Black Hawk helicopter, do you have the RJ in sight? That's what I often call like showing up in the middle of the movie. There's some transmission that occurred before that that is essential to know why that transmission was issued when it was. If you go back, and I believe I've heard a clip where what we would call in air traffic is calling traffic. Traffic was called to the Black Hawk helicopter to advise that the RJ was on a course for runway 33, and at that time was at about 1,200 feet. The Black Hawk crew requested permission, authorization to maintain visual separation from the aircraft, which means that the crew was accepting responsibility to steer clear of the path and the RJ that is now on what we would call short final. So whatever happened there after that was authorized, when you hear that second transmission, it is because the controller is noticing that the paths are still converging and quite possibly the altitude is now changing, which caused the controller to ask to verify whether or not the Black Hawk crew still had the regional jet in sight.
The other part of this that's drawing a lot of focus is there's a preliminary report from the FAA saying that there was only one air traffic safety controller in the tower at the time. And, the staffing is acceptable under FAA safety standards, but the source calls it not normal. Does it sound problematic to you to only have one individual kind of, guiding all this traffic at a very peak time at a busy airport?
Well, not normal is a situational assessment. I don't have enough information to really determine one way or the other. What I do know is in my career, there were times when we did combine or consolidate positions. We reallocated resources based on available staffing or volume. There may have been a need or an opportunity to consolidate just to be able to preserve the controllers that are available for the times that may be peak. So I don't know how many other positions were being staffed at the time. I can't really say what else might have been going on. What I do know is that there's more information that's needed before we reach any conclusions.
Of course, and we'll keep an eye on all of it. Todd, thank you so much for joining us.